Welcome to Gold Derby. I'm senior editor Denton Davidson here with Seth Rogen, who stars in the Apple TV Plus comedy series Platonic. Seth, when I spoke to the creators of the show, they told me that Rose Byrne had roped you into this, and you two, of course, starred together in the Neighbors films. How did she bring the project up to you? And is that an easy yes? Because I mean, it's been a while since you were the star of a TV show. I mean, you do mostly movies other than limited series like Pam and Tommy.
Um, yeah, it was a mostly easy yes. I think once I wrap, yeah, like you know, I the neighbors films are very like outwardly comedic, like our tone is like hard comedy. And that was one of my concerns or thoughts, honestly. It was just like that didn't seem to be a thing that was like even anyone's like real main directive in television that was like this type of television, kind of like high profile streaming shows, you know what I mean. I think things had taken a much darker turn, and so that was honestly like my one of my main, and also I'm just acutely aware of how different movies and TV are, and like there are great filmmakers who make bad television, and great television makers who make terrible films. Like it's not like an interchangeable skill set by any means. And like one, when you're good at one does not mean you'll be good at the other. And so that was something I also, again, was just very aware of, and I would say concerned about. Was that those were like conversations that I very much wanted to dive into, was like, how do we, do the difficult task of kind of delivering what I think people want from us and expect to us, and the thing we make really well together, but making it new and different and something that effortlessly seems like it would do should be on television and be entertaining on television, as opposed to these movies that we're normally making. But the people involved in everything, that was like the easiest thing. And obviously me and Rose are, I love working with her, and she's so funny. But yeah, I think overall just the idea of making like a comedic TV show scared me a little bit.
Is that what makes you kind of come on as a executive producer as well? Now that you have some experience, are you like, okay, I want my voice heard a little bit more just to make sure I'm getting into something that I can really stand behind?
Yeah, like I mean, it's I make almost nothing that I'm not a producer on in some capacity, and like every once in a while, yeah, like some, you know, another filmmaker will ask me to be a part of their film, but that does not, that decades go by without that happening, and so most of my work is self-generated, and especially with comedy, I have a lot of opinions and a lot of um you know and I like to be very collaborative with people, and in the past I've gotten in situations where, yeah, like um am not a part of the process, and I feel like I don't think anyone's happy when that when it happens, and so, but that being said, like I don't do a ton, like I'm not doing a ton on this show on the grand scale of things. It's mostly to, it's honestly, it's a lot of like just to make sure I'm like invited to the marketing meetings and stuff like that. With something like this, you just want to be involved in the marketing.
Yeah, no big directors are asking you to join their film. I mean, just like Steven Spielberg and The
Like I
Fableman.
say, it happens sometimes, but a lot of time goes by in between. We'll see when the next one is.
Well, the premise of the show is about these two friends who are heterosexual, and of course, one's a man, one's a woman, and how the friendship dynamic works in that situation, especially when one or both of them are in relationships. And it's an interesting topic. What were your thoughts going into that? And did it force you to sort of think about how it applies to your own life at all?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I really love the idea of it, and I think, like, to me, like honestly, like one of the funniest dynamics ever in television, especially, is where the Jerry and Elaine friendship got. You know what I mean? Like, I think in the first few seasons of Seinfeld, they were like playing with the past that they had dated and stuff like that. But I think if the show was in its like maybe third or fourth season, it kind of like all that fell by the wayside, basically. You know what I mean? And there's an episode where she pretends she admits she faked her orgasm. But that was like, to me, like a benchmark dynamic, was this like friendship between a man and a woman where they like are truly like pretty brutal with one another, and like they care about each other, but they're not like, you know, they don't have kid gloves with each other, and they're not in love with each other, so they don't have to be that careful with one another, you know what I mean? And because they don't have to live together, and when you love someone, you just want to be nice to them, and you want to, hopefully you want to really like put their feelings above yours in many ways. But when you're friends with someone, you often don't do that, you know. And so that to me was like a really funny new area for me and Rose to play in, because yeah, like what we had done before was very much steeped in the fact that we are a married couple with like a new baby, especially, you know. And so it as much, and we have almost no conflict with each other. Like that was our whole idea for Neighbors. Basically, it was like, what if we are a married couple who is not in conflict with each other, and instead we are like a unified front in conflict with this other force, you know what I mean? And that I think is like, that was like a very specific idea. And in this, that is not the idea. Like in this, like we are in conflict with each other a lot. And at times we're on the same page, like getting each other in trouble, but often we are really like in opposition with one another, choices, or we'll go into something together and then we start to realize we shouldn't be doing it. And so it just felt like an exciting and new fun, and yeah, and like to your point, like I do have those friendships and dynamics in real life, and there are women that I'm friends with and have been friends with for many years, and we have very honest, overt, you know, dynamics with one another that are funny, you know. And I think that's something that I just haven't seen a lot of in TV. Like the closest probably is Seinfeld, and even in that they had a relationship. And so this idea of like a man and a woman who are just friends, that's all they've ever really been, it just felt, yeah, like it spoke to my real life and many people's, I assume, and also was funny, you know.
Yeah, and I will admit I went in with some preconceived notions. I'm like, okay, so when are they going to hook up and cheat on each
Yeah.
other's spouses? But it doesn't happen, and that's refreshing. I mean, it is um really about them. It's also about friends reconnecting after not seeing each other for a period of years. And that was also funny to me because that brings out a lot of awkwardness. I think of when Sylvia shows Will her kids, and he's like, "Yep, there they are." Like he doesn't care like about like what her kids look like. So talk about that dynamic
That was tapping into some very real stuff for me, I think, you know.
and how kind of running into like an old friend can kind of pull you back into like an immature state almost, like you almost sort of start acting like you did maybe 20 years ago, and it sort of teleports them into a different level of maturity.
Yeah, I think there's like a regression that occurs. I think like in a lot of ways, like you kind of maintain a lot of the dynamics that you had when you first became friends with someone. So like, you know, I have friends that I'm friends with, been friends with since we were, you know, 12 years old. And like I probably talk about much stupider things with those friends than I do with the friends I met later in life, you know. Our baseline of conversation is much dumber and less mature and based on, you know, kind of more infantile ideas, and obviously it has grown and developed since then, but the foundation is much, you know, sillier probably than some of the friendships I've made as an adult. So yeah, I think that was something that we talked, you know, that was something we considered, was like, you know, these people have done a lot of stupid shit together, they partied a lot together, fucked up together a lot, they probably had insane drag, you know, fights with each other a million. They've been drunk on the streets screaming at each other 100 times before they're doing it in the show. So it's like, how do you weave that level of kind of comfort and like immaturity into the dynamic and make it believable?
And what do you enjoy about the character Will the most? And, you know, this man whose personal life is unraveling with divorce. Professionally, he's doing pretty well with his bar. Like, what do you enjoy most about playing Will and diving into that character?
um I think like a sad kind of pathetic guy is very funny. Like that's something I'm always I'm always chasing that. Like to me, there's something very, you know, comedic about someone who just is like the architect of their own demise in many ways, and who is making choices that make their own life worse in a desperate attempt to make their life better, um and yeah, and I just know a lot of people like this, and have seen a lot of people like this, people who, because of their own personalities, are incapable of maintaining long lasting relationships romantically with other people, and who uh are very successful in some avenues of life and are unable to translate that into this avenue of life, and who just make choices that out like from the outside like could not seem stupider and worse, but from their own delusion seem great, natural, and like the exact thing that they should be doing. One of my favorite movies, we can remove the art from the artist here, but Husbands and Wives is one of my favorite films, and I think a lot about that Sidney Pollack character, and that storyline to me was always very funny, and something that has always stuck out of my head. And that was, as I was reading these scripts initially and kind of thinking of the show like that, it was like, oh, this is kind of like a modern version of that character, and like in that movie, it's represented as like he's like a tweed jacket wearing kind of New York intellectual who, again, is just making like the worst choices fathomable, and to comedic and catastrophic effect in many ways. But it was always an idea that I thought was funny. It was like someone who kind of, by all metrics, is doing very well in life, but just makes choices, especially in their like romantic life, that is just like could not be worse and could not be more destructive, or more of an impairment or impediment to like their own happiness, even though they think they're doing the thing that will make them happy.
Who did you grow up watching? And like what, because you got into comedy so young. You were like 13 when you tried stand up, right? I mean, what kid does that? Like who inspired you to get up there?
My parents were big comedy fans like that. I like grew up watching a ton of comedy, and so that was my parents loved. I mean, I'd watch Saturday Night Live. I'd watch David Letterman. I'd watch. They were big like Billy Crystal fans, and so I'd watch Billy Crystal stand up and his movies, and they were big Woody Allen fans. I grew up watching a lot of like Hannah and her sisters, and they always, and Annie Hall, and they loved those movies, and Harold Ramis, and and John Hughes, and like my parents are just big film fans, but especially they love comedy. Bill Murray, and all those people, Nora Ephron, and so yeah, it's just always like I just always loved comedy, and like it seemed like as soon as I realized you could do that as like a job, I was like, oh, it seems like a job I should try to do.
Well, and it led to Freaks and Geeks, which one of the greatest TV shows to ever only last one season. That was a travesty of justice. But what was it like for you as a kid? Like when that show ends, are you devastated, or are you so like young and optimistic at that point? You're like, okay, well, what's next? And then a follow-up is, how does someone that young, you know, hold it together so well to continue to have such a successful TV and producing career? Because we see so many young stars just, I mean, everything falls apart with one failure.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it was partially, yeah, like the delusion of a young, cocky man. uh, yeah, but also like I was like and I still work hard, but like when I was young, especially, I was like much more competitive, and I was very aware, like, that I was competing for a job that like hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people were trying to get. And I remember thinking, like, unless I can like honestly tell myself that I'm at least working harder or as hard as everyone else trying to get these jobs to write movies and make movies, something that, again, they make, back then especially, they made like, fucking 30 movies a year, some shit like that. And like I wanted to make one of those. And so like I was like very aggressively determined in my path, especially when I was like 18, 19, 20, 21. And like so like when Freaks and Geeks was canceled, I was discouraged. I also didn't understand how like amazing. Like, again, I was sort of like, had this delusion of grant, like I was very sure of myself in many ways. And so this idea that I was on a TV show, and it was the first TV show I was on, and everyone was saying it was like one of the best TV shows that had been on in decades, and it was incredible and amazing. I was like, yeah, of course, like that's what we do. We're fucking great, you know. And now years later, I'm like, oh wow, I was like so lucky to be a part of that group of people, and it's miraculous that John and Paul and Jason, and John, and all Linda, all these people like came together to do this thing. The fact that almost all of them still have careers and are still relevant people working today in Hollywood and still are creating output that people like that like never fucking happens, And so I like yeah, so that's all to say, like, I have a very different perspective on it now than I did then. And at the time, I was like, yeah, like I look back and marvel at how determined I was and how kind of, yeah, like kind of ravenous I was as far as pursuing what I wanted to pursue, but also like how hard I worked. Like I really was like, okay, Freaky is canceled. What's next? What do we do now? I'll make Superbad. I'll make Pineapple. We'll start writing Pineapple Express. I'll try to do something else. Like, yeah. And so I really like, I thought I could do it. So I just kept going.
Well, is it true you started writing Superbad when you were like 13 or something with Evan Goldberg? And then now you guys still just keep working together. You're like the Ben Affleck and Matt Damon of Vancouver.
Maybe. Either way, I mean, yeah, I see him all the time. I was with him all day yesterday. Yeah, it's great, and we marvel at it, and we feel very lucky that you know, that we found each other and that we still like each other and that we still work well together. Like I know a lot of partnerships that have not lasted, you know what I mean? And people who wrote together for decades that have stopped working together. And so it's great, and it makes my life so much easier, and it makes it everything more fun. And having a partner that you work well with is like, yeah, it's like the idea I would have to sit alone and write is, and I do it sometimes, and I hate it. So it's much nicer to sit with someone and write.
What do you like on set as an actor? Like I was when watching this series, I'm like, are you guys improving at all, or are you strict to what's on the page? Because I'm watching you two in the diner where you're just blasted, and I mean, you're telling her to like work, like punch your husband above the kidney to make him finish faster. I mean, that kind of stuff made the little things make me laugh the most. How often do you play with the script, or are you pretty intent on sticking with what's on the page?
I mean, it totally depends on the thing that we're making. And like with this, it is very much geared towards improv, and it is filmed in a way that is designed to capture improv. And so that's something that's kind of what I try to be aware of, is like, is this being filmed in a way that we should improvise, or is it being filmed in a way that we should not improvise? And it's quite a technical thing, you know what I mean? And I am acutely aware of when improv will be usable and when it won't be usable editorially based on how we're filming things. And so I try, and a director's desire to have us improvise. But Nick is great because he does it all. He wants you to improvise, and he films it in the correct way to capture that improv. Some directors want you to improvise, but they're not filming it in the way to capture improv. And some directors are filming things in a way that are kind of designed to capture improv, but you're not improvising. So you're like, we could be making this look better. And so I think like it needs to be a marriage of process and result, you know what I mean? And so with Nick, he wants you to improvise, especially with me and Rose. It's like the scenes are designed to be improvised upon, and he is filming it in such a way that he is, intent on capturing that improv in the way that it is most usable editorially. And so yes, long answer short, we improvise a lot on this show, and other things I don't improvise at all if it's not, what the project seems to want, you know what I mean? But yeah, me and Rose improvise a ton, especially on this, and like we very much are good with each other's rhythms, and working with each other, and we specifically, I would say, have like a huge amount of improv together. Yeah.
Well, it's so much fun to watch the chemistry, and it's shifted chemistry of friendship in this series. And congratulations on the show. Shout out to the Emmys. Hopefully you and Rose and the whole cast and crew get some name calls this year. We're hoping for the best, and congratulations on the show. It's streaming on Apple TV Plus, and thanks for sitting down with Gold Derby today.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.